Story 1. I'd been working on a major project for months, and my company finally decided it was time for me to present our progress to our Seattle-based client. It was a big deal for me, my first solo presentation to a high-profile client. I was nervous but excited. My flight from Maryland to Seattle was scheduled for 7 m, and being the anxious person I am, I arrived at the airport at 5 a.m. I figured 2 hours would be plenty of time to check my bag, get through security, grab some breakfast, and maybe even review my presentation one last time. When I got to the check-in counter, I saw a line of about 15 to 20 people. Not great, but not terrible either. I thought I'd still be fine. What I didn't expect was the chaos unfolding at the front of the line. There was this family, a mom, a dad, a baby, and 3 kids who looked to be between 4 and 9 years old. They had a mountain of luggage with them, 16 bags to be exact, and they were completely unprepared. The airline only had 2 people working the check-in counter, and one of them got stuck dealing with this family. They hadn't checked in online, hadn't prepared for their bags, and hadn't even tagged their luggage. To top it off, their credit card wasn't working, and they were demanding 5 seats together on a full flight. I watched as 1 hour ticked by, and they were still at the counter. The line behind me grew longer and longer, reaching about 50 people. Everyone was getting frustrated, but the family seemed oblivious to the inconvenience they were causing. At one point, the mother actually walked away from the counter in tears, claiming her children were embarrassing her. I wanted to tell her it wasn't the kids everyone was mad at. The mother dramatically complained about her children embarrassing her, while someone in line pointed out that it wasn't the kids everyone was annoyed with. When I finally got to check my bag, it had been over 50 minutes of waiting. The flight was being held because so many people were still stuck in line, trying to check their bags and get through security. But the real showdown came when we boarded the plane. Since there weren't 5 seats together, the family got spread out. The mother and 1 child got a row, another child was across the aisle, the 3rd child was in the middle seat behind them, and the father was in the middle seat in the row behind that. Throughout the flight, they barely paid attention to their kids, except to yell at them occasionally. They seemed to expect the other passengers to babysit their children. The father asked a nearby passenger to keep an eye on his child. The passenger, clearly annoyed, reminded the father that they weren't a babysitter. The mother chimed in, insisting that their children were well behaved, which was far from the truth. As if all of this wasn't bad enough, I overheard a conversation that made my blood boil. The parents discussed their travel plans, revealing that they had called a car rental place in Texas, but found it too expensive. They congratulated themselves on finding a cheaper option on the West Coast. The father boasted about being able to charge their flights and all their bags to the government due to his military status, while the mother exclaimed about how much money they were saving on the rental car. They didn't even need to be on this flight. They were actually headed to Texas to get the wife's car and belongings, but decided to fly to Seattle instead because renting a car there was cheaper, and they were abusing the father's military status to charge everything to the government. By the time we landed in Seattle, I was exhausted and annoyed. I had missed breakfast, barely had time to collect my thoughts before my presentation, and had to deal with screaming kids for hours. But I decided to take action. I approached an airline staff member at the gate and explained the situation, including the part about them misusing government funds. The staff member looked shocked and assured me they would report this to the appropriate authorities. As I left the airport, I saw the family arguing with the car rental company. Apparently, their reservation had been mysteriously canceled. I couldn't help but smile a little. Sometimes, karma works in beautiful ways. I made it to my presentation just in time, running on nothing but coffee and spite. But you know what? I nailed it. Maybe all that frustration fueled my performance. In the end, I got a big contract for my company and a story I'll be telling for years to come. Story 2. So when I was younger, I was spoiled. I'm not gonna lie. I had almost every console a kid could dream of, and my cousin didn't. I would let them play on my consoles when they came over, but never borrow because I was overprotective of them, which I realized was dumb as I got older. Fast forward a few years, my cousin is older and has a job, so he has his own consoles and everything, but has come to collect retro consoles and games, which I had a lot of. He offers to buy some of them, and I turned him down because I want to keep my memories and potentially pass them on to my kids so they can live the age of 15 FPS. Here's where it gets crappy. My uncle for years basically makes it seem that my cousin is entitled to my stuff because I denied him borrowing it when I was still rocking Spider-Man PJs, and consistently tries pressuring me into just handing them over. Late 2022, after I've moved out into my own place and have all my consoles and games in storage, my cousin, who quit asking about the consoles after like a month of me saying no BTW comes to visit, and we're just hanging and bonding, when he gives me a housewarming gift, which was a N64 cartridge of Majora's Mask because it was our favorite game. My uncle didn't like that. 2 nights later, I'm in bed, sleeping as you do when I hear a loud click, followed by a snap. I jump out of bed looking for anything I can use as a weapon and call the cops. I peek my head out and see my uncle's bald head glaring in the moonlight, going through my crap as quiet as he can. After about 10 minutes of him going through my stuff, the cops show up and we do the whole questions, and I watch him get put into a cop car and all that. He broke in through my balcony window. Click was the crowbar pushing into the lock. Snap was part of the window around the window spiderweb, and nothing was stolen. And because my cousin asked, I'm not pressing charges, but asking for damages paid. Edit. So it's been 2 days, and since the incident I've bought some cameras off Amazon, not the best, but they alert my phone, and they're hidden. As for people asking why I didn't press charges, my cousin asked me to not press charges. He's gone through a lot since the pandemic and couldn't handle losing his pops. I understand it's not exactly the best response, but he's my family. I am going through the process of a restraining order. Update. A lot had happened since my last post. We had some family drama, and my cousin cut ties with his uncle. Some family members were against my cousin while others weren't. Like I mentioned in my last post, my cousin and I are retro collectors, and my uncle tried stealing from me and I didn't press charges. Since then, my cousin has moved in with a GF, and she's a nerd too, so love at first sight. They started putting their collection in their own gaming room, and it looks awesome. They posted it on social media for the whole family to see, and I guess my uncle had seen it. FF to about a month ago, and my cousin sets up a surprise birthday party for his GF and invites us all cause we love her like family. My uncle had caught wind of it and crashed the party. He's bitchin' and moaning about family turning on him, how we disrespected him, blah blah blah. We all managed to get him out, and we think it's over. The same night, he breaks into my cousin's neighbor's apartment, pissed drunk, thinking it was my cousin's. Neighbor calls the cops. They show up and take statements, do their job, and my uncle gets slapped in cuffs and dragged down to jail. My cousin was devastated, but I'm not gonna lie, I found it hilarious and thought you would too. I only recently got permission to post now as the situation died down a bit amongst family. For those who will ask, yes, he was charged with attempted assault and disturbing the peace, as there was footage from the building CCTV of him yelling at civilians trying to get into the building. Story 3. My name is Sarah, and I am a young mother of 2 living in a small suburb just outside of the city. My husband and I had been saving up for months to buy our children some new clothes and toys, and we had finally saved enough money to make the trip to the mall. I had been looking forward to this outing for weeks, and was excited to spend some quality time with my children and treat them to a few new things. I had planned out our route carefully, making sure to hit all of the best sales and deals at the various stores. As we made our way through the crowded corridors of the mall, I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy and excitement. I loved watching my children's eyes light up as they marveled at all of the colorful displays and shiny new toys. But despite my best efforts, I found myself feeling a little overwhelmed by the crowds and the noise. I had a lot on my mind, and sometimes it was hard to keep track of everything. That's why I found myself standing in the middle of the walkway, lost in thought, when Karen approached me. As Karen approached me, I could tell from the haughty expression on her face that she was not happy to see me standing in the middle of the walkway. "Excuse me," Karen said, tapping me on the shoulder. "But could you please move out of the way? I have places to be, and I don't have time to stand around." I was taken aback by the rude tone in her voice. I was a decent, kind-hearted person, and I didn't appreciate being spoken to in such a manner. "I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to find my way to the food court," I replied calmly. "I'm not trying to hold you up or anything." Karen let out an exaggerated sigh and crossed her arms. "Well, maybe if you paid more attention to where you were going instead of daydreaming, you wouldn't be blocking the way for everyone else," she snapped. I was taken aback by Karen's rude and entitled behavior, but I refused to let it get to me. I gave her a polite smile and went in the direction of the food court. "Have a good day," I said, before making my way past Karen and continuing on my way. But Karen was not satisfied with my response. She followed me, berating me for blocking the way and daydreaming in a rude and aggressive manner. Despite my attempts to de-escalate the situation and calmly explain that I was just trying to find my way, Karen seemed to get even more agitated and angry. "You think you're better than everyone else just because you're standing here in the middle of the walkway?" Karen spat out. "Well, you're not. You're just a selfish, entitled person who doesn't care about anyone but themselves." I was shocked by Karen's harsh words, but I refused to let them get to me. I knew that she was just trying to provoke me, and I wasn't going to let her succeed. I gave her a polite smile and continued on my way, determined to enjoy my time at the mall with my family and not let Karen's negativity ruin my day. I had finally managed to escape Karen's tirade and was making my way to the food court to meet up with my family, when I felt a sudden jolt to my chest. I looked down to see Karen standing in front of me, blocking my way and looking angry and aggressive. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen demanded, shoving me in the chest. "You can't just walk away from me like that." I was shocked by Karen's behavior, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. But what Karen didn't know was that I had an implantable cardiac defibrillator planted in my chest to keep me alive. This device was designed to detect and correct any abnormal heart rhythms that could potentially be life-threatening. As Karen shoved me, I felt a sudden jolt of pain in my chest. I knew immediately that she had smashed my IT, and I could feel my heart racing out of control. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stand there, staring at Karen in shock and disbelief. Karen seemed confused by what had happened, and her expression changed from anger to confusion. "What's going on?" she demanded. "I don't understand what's happening. Why are you just standing there like that?" I tried to explain that she had smashed my IT and that I needed to get to a hospital as quickly as possible, but Karen seemed unable to grasp the gravity of the situation. She looked even angrier and more confused, and I could see that she was starting to get agitated again. "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen snapped. "You're just trying to get out of this situation by making up some crazy excuse. I'm not letting you walk away from me until you explain yourself." I was terrified and frustrated by Karen's refusal to understand what was happening. My heart was racing out of control, and I knew that I had to get help as quickly as possible before it was too late. But Karen seemed determined to keep me there, no matter what. I knew that I had to do something drastic to get away from Karen and get the help I needed. So I started screaming for help, hoping that someone would hear me and come to my aid. "Help!" I shouted as loud as I could. "Someone please call the security guards and an ambulance. I need help." To my relief, I saw several people turning to look at me in surprise and concern. I could see them pulling out their phones and starting to dial for help. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to be losing control of herself. She was getting ignored by everyone, and it was clear that she was starting to panic. "What are you doing?" Karen demanded, trying to grab hold of me. "This is all just an act. You're just trying to get attention. You're not really sick." But I was beyond caring about what Karen thought or said. All I cared about was getting the help I needed. I continued to scream and plead for help, and I could see that more and more people were starting to take notice. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Karen charged at me one last time, trying to convince others that I was acting out and faking it. But before she could reach me, my husband appeared out of nowhere and shoved Karen to the floor. He gently picked me up and started walking towards the nearest security booth, determined to get me the help I needed. As my husband carried me towards the nearest security booth, I couldn't help but feel much calmer with him by my side. But I wasn't entirely safe yet, as I could hear Karen in the background screaming like a banshee that she was going to destroy my husband for shoving her. She started running after him, determined to catch him and make him pay for his actions. I was terrified and worried for my husband's safety, and I could feel my heart racing once again. But to my relief, a few brave guys managed to stop Karen from reaching him and kept her detained until a couple security guards arrived on the scene. The security guards took control of the situation, detaining Karen properly and ensuring that she couldn't cause any more harm. An ambulance arrived shortly after, and I was relieved to see the familiar faces of the paramedics who rushed to my side and helped me into the ambulance. As the ambulance raced towards the hospital, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the quick actions of my husband, the brave guys who had stopped Karen, and the security guards who had detained her. I knew that without their help, things could have turned out much worse. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctors and nurses rushed to my side and began examining me. They quickly determined that my eyes had been damaged, and they worked quickly to fix it and stabilize my heart. And sure enough, a few hours later, I learned that Karen had indeed been arrested by the cops. They had pulled out the CCTV footage and taken statements from others, and that Karen had resisted arrest and forced the cops to use force in cuffing her. Later, as I recovered from my ordeal in the hospital, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen to Karen. I knew that she had been arrested and charged with assault and destruction of private property, and I hoped that she would receive a stiff sentence for her actions. And sure enough, a few weeks later, I learned that Karen had indeed been sentenced to prison for her crimes. The judge took into consideration the fact that Karen had assaulted a sick person like myself and destroyed my private medical device, putting my life at risk in the process. I was relieved to hear that Karen would be held accountable for her actions, and I hoped that she would learn her lesson and think twice before acting out in such an entitled and aggressive manner again. As I moved on with my life and continued to recover from the traumatic experience, I knew that I would always be grateful to my husband and the others who had helped me and protected me from Karen's aggression. I knew that without their quick thinking and bravery, things could have turned out much worse, and I knew that I would always be thankful for the justice that had been served in this case. Story 4. Back in my college days, several friends and I went to Lake Havasu, Arizona for spring break. Those of you who have been probably hung around the London Bridge Resort at some point. Next to the hotel area, there is a walking path that follows a canal which leads under the old London Bridge and then to Lake Havasu itself. This canal allows people to park their boats within walking distance to the resort. One night, 3 of my friends and I went for a stroll along this path. During our walk, we heard some shouting which went along the lines of, be cool, we're leaving, man, just be cool." My group hung back for a bit. After a sec, a group of guys came up. We asked them what was going on, and they said there were 2 guys in a boat. They were flashing people in the face with a spotlight, talking crap and pissing them off, then pulling out a pistol when they were about to get their butts kicked. We will refer to the guys in the boat as douchebags from here out. So my group decided that we weren't going to stand for this, and came up with a plan. We continued down the pathway to douchebag's boat and played dumb. We asked them what those guys were so scared of. Being the smug, self-satisfied little douches they were, said, those guys wanted to pick a fight with us. So I pulled my gat on M. It was actually an old .38 revolver. At that point I knew this was going to be easy. You see, one of the members of our group was a girl, a pretty girl wearing a bikini and cut-off jean shorts. She laid on the dumb bimbo card and in no time had them eating out of her hand. She said, "I've never seen a gun before. Is it heavy? Do you have any more?" Those jerks handed her their gun to hold and said, "No, that's the only one." She then handed it to our buddy Jay, who's a 6'4", 280-pound wall of meat. Jay threw that gun close to 250 feet away into the canal, which made a very satisfying thunk when it hit water. Both douchebags were completely speechless. It took them close to 20 seconds just to process what had happened. Finally, one of them spoke and was all, why did you do that? You better go get it." We just laughed and I said, "No, we won't. Think about next time you're flashing people with that spotlight." After a few moments of incoherent shouting, one of them tried to get into Jay's face for some stupid reason. He didn't even make it out of his boat and Jay shoved him back into his seat hard enough that it broke. Neither one of the douchebags were very big. Our girl buddy could have taken them. Other buddy Jace told them to go park somewhere else for the night, because if we saw them again, we would kick their butts for real. So they pulled off, and when they were out and away from us, they started talking crap again. But we just kept laughing at them. After they were gone, we finished our walk, went back to the hotel and started partying again. It was a great night, so if any of you make it out that way again, get your snorkel out. There's an old rusted piece of crap pistol at the bottom of canal by the London Bridge Resort. Story 5. Backstory. I used to work a temporary job at a fish hatchery in a remote area of southeastern Idaho, focusing on endangered sockeye salmon. I was genuinely excited to start this job because of its importance to the recovery of salmon species. However, I soon discovered that the managers there were some of the most unpleasant and unprofessional people I had encountered. Both managers were men, and I mention this only because it's relevant to the story. Not to generalize, there were countless instances of poor management, but I'll focus on one story that stood out for its humor. Before I started, I learned that one of the other temporary employees had been required to clean up an unpleasant mess left in one of the restrooms. Apparently, one of the managers had left a mess around the toilet bowl, and this unfortunate employee had to power wash it clean. What a prime example of leadership. The story. There were 2 restrooms in the main office area. Naturally, the 3 of us who were not managers hoped that one restroom could be designated for us women. These restrooms were identical and located next to each other in the hallway, so it seemed like a reasonable request. Unfortunately, our manager, who seemed to enjoy asserting control, refused. He insisted there was no need for separate restrooms, as both should be shared equally. For weeks, we observed him using both restrooms, often without washing his hands after, adding to our frustration. The situation had the other ladies and me at our wits' end. I finally decided to get creative. If he wanted us all to use the restrooms equally, we would make sure he really felt that equality. The plan begins. Since I lived on site and arrived at work before everyone else, I could set up my plan quietly each morning. I drove to the nearest town, about 45 minutes away, and stocked up on various feminine products. I started small by placing a box of extra-large super heavy flow tampons on the counter in one restroom. Did the manager take the hint? Not at all. In fact, he began exclusively using that restroom, which was both perplexing and a little disturbing. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I gradually increased the pressure. I placed a box of adult-sized, super heavy flow pads on the counter beside a bright red lipstick. I then started spraying floral perfumes in the restroom each morning and leaving the bottles beside the sink. This only elicited a casual comment from him. "Wow, it smells nice in there." Really, nothing seemed to faze him. Escalation. After 2 weeks of little progress, it was time to ramp up my efforts. I found a highly obvious bottle labeled as a feminine hygiene product and sprayed it into the toilet, leaving the empty bottle on top of the toilet tank. Beside it, I placed an open container of flowery lotion, as if it had recently been used. Finally, I scattered a few tampons around the sink, opening them to enhance the effect. We waited with bated breath. Right on cue, the manager entered that particular restroom. After just a few seconds, he emerged, without making eye contact, and swiftly moved to the other restroom next door, the one we had initially proposed for him to use. We struggled to contain our laughter, and the sense of triumph was unforgettable. The aftermath. The manager didn't speak to us for about a week, and avoided eye contact for another week. He also never returned to that restroom, even after we removed all of our supplies, since they had served their purpose perfectly. I realize this story might spark a debate about restroom designations, which was never the intent. This event took place 6 or 7 years ago, and our only goal was to encourage the manager and assistant manager to use a separate restroom. Thank you for reading. I have more stories from my time at this hatchery, so stay tuned, you might hear from me again soon. Story 6. Background: I attended a Catholic school that enforced the traditional uniform many boys dream about for some reason: white shirt and plaid skirt. The uniform rules were strict, covering everything from shoe and sock color to jewelry restrictions. The rules allowed girls to wear tights under their skirts, but nothing else, not leggings or sweatpants, and definitely not yoga pants, which weren't even a thing back then. Our choices for legwear were bare legs, pantyhose, or tights. When winter arrived, we were always cold. The school building was an old, drafty structure made of marble and limestone, so the chill was inescapable. To this day, I still feel cold when I shouldn't, wondering if years of shivering somehow affected me permanently. Now, let's get to the story. Guess what else is cold in winter? Outdoor recess. Whoever thought it was a good idea to force children to play outside in freezing weather with minimal protective layers must have been a bit callous. Boys had pants and blazers, so they stayed reasonably warm, though they might catch a chill. We could wear jackets, but imagine being outside in a winter coat over a knee-length skirt. The coat helped, but not enough. While the boys played, we girls would huddle near sewer grates and storm drains, trying to absorb any warmth from the steam, or, if a delivery truck was around, we'd lean against its engine to capture some heat. The teachers seemed oblivious to our suffering. To clarify, we did have indoor recess, but only if there was active precipitation. If snow had just fallen, it didn't count. Only if it was currently snowing or raining when recess began were we allowed to stay indoors. If it started raining 5 minutes after we went outside, too bad. When we reached 5th grade, they decided to teach us responsibility. Missing homework assignments not only impacted our grades, but also led to additional punishment. I was unaware of this change until I accidentally missed my first assignment. I can't remember the reason. Maybe I left the necessary book at school or forgot about the assignment altogether. Whatever the case, it was an honest mistake. When I came to class without my homework, the teacher told me to stay after class. She informed me that, according to the contract I had signed at the start of the year, I had to stay behind and eat lunch alone while everyone else went to recess. Missing recess was my punishment, and I accepted it as fair. Surprisingly, the punishment turned out to be rather enjoyable. With everyone else finished eating, there was no line in the cafeteria, and the lunch staff, seeing me there alone, kindly offered me extra servings. I sat in the quiet cafeteria and found that I enjoyed eating in peace rather than amid the usual chaotic crowd of students. Still, lunch and recess were our only real chances to socialize, so I asked the teacher overseeing lunch detention if I could go outside since my punishment was supposed to be late lunch, not missing recess entirely. She declined, explaining that lunch detention was designed to deprive me of recess as well. I thought that was the end of it. But as the weather turned colder, conversations during recess turned to the usual topics: who had found thicker tights or other creative ways to stay warm. Most of us ended up with a collection of thick, cable-knit tights, which, despite their appearance, didn't offer much warmth due to the holes in the knit pattern. One day, after missing another assignment, I served my detention and had an idea. If I continued to forget my homework, I'd have lunch detention daily and wouldn't have to go outside in the cold. I thought I'd outsmarted the system. So I started skipping homework in the class with the nicest teacher, hoping she'd go easy on me. After a few days, though, she warned that if I missed another assignment, she'd call my mom. Realizing my error, I switched to missing assignments in a different class to spread out the detentions. The rules stated that any missed homework meant lunch detention. So by staggering the assignments I missed, I managed to stay warm without the teachers suspecting a pattern. This tactic worked for about a month before the teachers noticed. They either compared notes or the lunch detention supervisors became suspicious about my frequent appearances. Eventually, my mom got a call from the school. They asked her if anything was happening at home or if I was struggling academically. They suggested that maybe I was under stress or having difficulty with some subjects. When my mom questioned me, I explained my situation. I told her that sitting quietly and alone in the warm cafeteria was much more appealing than facing the bitter cold outside. I was still maintaining good grades, understanding the subjects, and completing necessary work. But I didn't see the downside of skipping a few assignments to avoid freezing. My mom listened, then surprised me by admitting that I made complete sense. She even said she was proud of how I had found a way to work within the system they had set up. Mom then called the school to arrange a meeting with my principal and homeroom teacher. She addressed the dress code issues first, asking if it was true that the girls were reprimanded and made to remove any additional layers they wore outside. The principal stammered, confirming it. My mom pointed out that my friends and I were willing to tolerate the cold indoors, but only violated the dress code outdoors when the temperatures were unbearable. The principal defended the policy as a way to teach ladylike conduct, but my mom wasn't having it. She calmly informed the principal that if the school wasn't going to allow her daughter to wear warmer clothing outdoors, then I would continue skipping homework to avoid the cold. She made it clear that I wasn't violating any rules in my strategy, and she fully supported my decision. After the meeting, I continued my system for a few more days, until a lunch monitor approached me, suggesting I eat faster so I could join the others outside. I declined, explaining that I preferred the warmth of the cafeteria. She seemed disappointed, but I soon realized her motive. She didn't want to stay indoors supervising me and wanted her own social time outside with her colleagues. I told her plainly, "You can go outside with your friends when the dress code changes or the weather warms up." She didn't bring it up again. When I shared this with my mom, she laughed and suggested I share my system with other girls who hated being cold. With her encouragement, I told a few friends, and soon we had a small group rotating missed assignments to stay indoors. This arrangement lasted all winter until the weather improved. The following year, the school allowed an indoor recess option during cold days, and eventually, they revised the dress code. By the time we reached 7th grade, they introduced winter uniforms with pants and sweaters for the girls. And that's how, at 10 years old, I managed to change a century-old uniform policy at my school.